Hi, I'm Kent,
And I'm Anna.
and this is Film and Family. If you're ready to take your film career to the next level without sacrificing a healthy and satisfying personal life, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe to never miss an episode.
Let's jump right in.
So I want to
Switch gears
switch gears a little bit more to the filmmaking as well. So I want to dig into how many feature films have you made?
So I've made technically 3. I've released 2, but like I said, that first feature was called Footsteps. I never released it, so that kind of doesn't count. But if you qualify that, 3 in total.
I'll count it.
Wait, and you called that one your film school. Did you go to film school, just as a side note?
No, I didn't. I actually studied psychology. I got my undergrad in psychology, but
Oh,
I
that's
was
so cool.
making films that whole time. I probably should have gone to film school. I was just shooting movies that whole period. But I was sort of advised by a director a couple of years prior to consider maybe going to study something else just to broaden my perspective. And I was super interested in psychology too. So,
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I just want to make that point again. I mean, we've mentioned this maybe on the podcast before, but I've been saying this to a lot of young filmmakers that have been reaching out to me just this last week or two. I mean, we're young filmmakers too, but like 19-year-old kids. And they keep saying like things about they're not sure if they're going to make certain decisions that are going to take time away from in their minds. Their progress towards graduation, their progress toward certain career milestones, and all the stuff you said about family, as well as the stuff you're saying now about a psychology degree as opposed to a film degree. I keep telling them, I say, don't put your life off for film, because then you're only going to know film. And then you're only going to make movies about movies. And you're going to make movies that reflect the medium and reflect the genre, and they reflect all the things that are movie, but they don't reflect life, which is kind of the purpose of art, is to actually make some sort of a reflection or interpretation of life. And if you don't have one, then there's this shallowness. And I keep watching these movies that are so aware of themselves as this is an action movie. And that's all it is. And it's almost like my own existence is only to get to the next set piece or the next action-ness. And I'm like, yeah, but what does this have to do with anything? And so the best movies are like, wow, this is about life, carefully camouflaged as maybe a genre piece or maybe not. But yeah, I just wanted to note that I think that all those things are serving you, and you're allowing them to serve you in your filmmaking career in such a powerful way. So I find that really inspiring.
Oh, I think that was a really smart move. I actually did a similar thing after graduating from film school. I've always been interested in the mind and psychology, and I took some psychology classes in film school. But
in
while I was
the
at
university,
college, yeah. And then afterwards went back to school to become certified as a life coach, and at a program that really studies in depth how your mind works and how your brain works and how human behavior is motivated. And that changed the way I approached filmmaking so much in really good ways. And so I think that is very cool that you have that background.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think, something like psychology and just getting into the human mind is so helpful in every aspect of life. And now I kind of wish I paid more attention in those years than I did. I retained some of the knowledge, but if I could have gone back now at this age, it probably would have been a lot more valuable. But yeah, I just think, everybody kind of has to decide for themselves if film school is right for them. I think there's an argument on both sides. Obviously, some people have a great network for their whole careers of friends that they meet at film school. But then there's other people, like myself, who I was, I always did fairly well in school, but I didn't love being in school. I always wanted to be out with my friends and shooting movies and skateboarding and playing music. Like, I was just not an academic type. So my fear was that if I would enroll in film school, it would become a chore and it wouldn't be fun anymore. And then I wouldn't want to do it, professionally, or I wouldn't want to pursue it. It would kind of take the fun out of it. And I don't know if that actually would have happened or not, but that was sort of part of my decision for not pursuing it. But to sort of echo something that I think you both said in one way or another, but I'll phrase it a little differently, is I think becoming a great filmmaker or becoming great at anything in life, whatever it is that you're trying to do, I think is always comes down to just being the best version of yourself, the most authentic version of yourself. You know, if you're watching a film from a filmmaker and it's a film only they could have made because either it's a personal story where it deals with knowledge or subject matter or background that only they have and nobody else could have made that same movie, those are usually the best movies. And it's not because that person went to film school or didn't, or knew how to use a camera or didn't. It's because they had some sort of real perspective from real life that they could share. So I think for somebody who's, you know, let's say interested in some other field entirely, but also loves film, you know, that's great. I had filmmakers on my podcast who they've made these incredible science-based documentaries, and they're super into science, you know, and that's what leads their filmmaking. And they've had a tremendous amount of success with their films as a result. So I think, you know, if your truest version of yourself, even if it's not what you think kind of the traditional filmmaker's path is supposed to look like, there's no such a thing. And I feel like you kind of can't go wrong when you lean into your own sensibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so true. That reminds me actually of one of the biggest takeaways I got from a film festival that I attended, and I won't mention which one it was, but it was kind of cheesy. There's a lot of cheesy stuff getting made, and the stuff that did really stand out, there was one director in particular who gave this advice and said, "What would you make if it was the last film you ever made?" Which I liked that thought, but then I even took it further and said, "What would I make if I was the only one who was going to watch this film?"
Oh, interesting.
If I'm going to make this film not for anyone else, because I'm not trying to please anyone else or make something I think they would like. I'm going to make something that I want to watch, and I'm going to make it something that I like, and most likely someone else will also like it too. And that has really helped me find a lot of clarity about what is authentic to me, and if it works for me, I don't really care if it is maybe a little non-traditional, or if I am worried about what other people might think. That usually is a good sign, actually, because it means I'm getting really personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from a practicality standpoint, it's better to have that sort of film to find an audience with and to market the film with, because it's something truly original. You know, the broader that you go with your concept or idea and the more sort of generic the movie becomes, the bigger the budget has to be in order to get people's attention. Because if it's not totally unique, you know, and we can talk about a lot of the tentpole films that come out of Hollywood these days that are kind of all derivatives of each other, and we've seen them a million times before, but those work because they have hundreds of millions of dollars backing them, so they could do crazy special effects and hire A-list actors and all the things that you need to do if you're not relying on something that's incredibly specific and unique. But if you're on the other side of the spectrum, you don't have a lot of money, but you have a really unique idea or approach or concept or character or something that nobody's really seen before, and maybe it wouldn't appeal to everyone who's going to go stand in line for the next Star Wars, but it would appeal to, you know, a couple of thousand people that are going to be diehard lovers of that movie because they've never seen anything like that. That helps you, I think, early in your career, just get, you know, help your films reach people and inspire people and start building an audience for yourself that hopefully over time just continues to grow.
Yeah. You know, I don't think this really applies to many of the listeners or of this podcast or even you, but one thing that blows my mind is how many lay people have not seen La La Land. It's like this movie that's super personal. It's super specific. It's very, you like it or you don't. But I'm always blown away. I'm like, I don't think that many Americans actually saw this movie except film buffs and musical buffs. And otherwise, it was overseas. I think that movie probably blew up. And the film buffs and the musical buffs definitely saw it in the United States. And so you're saying is like, there's an audience for it. It's 30 million. It's not really a tent pole, but it's a big movie, and it went big, like in the award circuit, and you know, and it's in the annals of history. I'm sure it's it's an interesting point, and you
Yeah.
just have to scale that properly. But
And
yeah,
if you take that back a notch too, it's like La La Land was built on the back of Whiplash, which is, as about as specific and personal as it could get.
Yeah.
From what I know, that's basically derived from Damien Chazelle's experience as a drummer himself. And obviously it's a fictional story, but it came from this personal place, and that I think people really latched onto. And then a movie like La La Land, which is maybe a bit broader, but still had that personal touch to it, then, he could kind of scale things up to that level. But yet, it all starts with just being authentic, being yourself. Like, nobody's first movie is just, unless you're Quentin Tarantino, he's like the only exception to that rule, where like he could just watch movies and his movies could be, an amalgamation of every movie he's ever seen. And that's kind of his thing. But unless you're Tarantino and that's your thing, which at this point, it's, again, then you're just being derivative of someone like him, then yeah, you're always better off leaning into your own personal experience, in my opinion.
yeah.
Yeah, and Damien Chazelle was afraid
to even let
show people that script.
He wouldn't even let his agent read the script for Whiplash until she found it and read it, and she was like, "This is really good." And he was like, "Oh, I kind of just wrote this in like a fit of anger." And then he's like, "And then we have to pitch this thing, which is like, oh, it's a thriller about a jazz drummer," and everyone's like, he's like, you couldn't even get them past that pitch. I don't understand. That's why they had to do the short, because no one really knew what the heck he was doing, and so they had to do the short film to kind of show like, this is what we're doing, and then they go, oh, that really works. And so it was
that's
anyway.
One of the dangers of having a very pitchable idea is that people might just assume, or you might assume as a filmmaker, that your idea is great because everybody likes it when you pitch it to them. And there's all this advice that, you have to have your elevator pitch and know how to describe what the story is in 2 sentences so you can get people excited. And there's, nothing wrong with that advice at all. It certainly helps you from a business standpoint, but that is no indication ever of whether people are actually going to like your movie. You could have the best movie in your head, but it doesn't fit into that kind of paradigm where you could just describe it in 2 sentences. And like, how do you could describe something like Dazed and Confused. I don't know, I just think of a Linklater film off the top of my head, but like any of his films, before Trilogy, any of those movies, you could kind of describe them in a sentence or 2. But if you were just to pitch that to the average person, they'd probably say, okay, 2 people walking around the street or a bunch of high school kids. It's like, I don't get it. The things that are easy to pitch, the things that are kind of, quote, high concept, those don't always actually translate to be the best movies. Sometimes they're just the best pitches, or they're the easiest things to get funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of I wonder what Malik was doing when he was walking around pitching Tree of Life.
Oh, that one took him forever to get
it was
funded.
decades. He finally was like, I'll do this thing, because, Brad Pitt decided to executive produce it. Yeah.
Well, and going to this business side of things, I'm just curious.
Yeah, let's get into that just for a minute.
I think that because you've been there a few times, right? And done this. And there's a few perceptions that I think are common, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on them, if you believe them or not. One is that the first few films are the hardest, or the first one is the hardest to get going. And then the other is just that people don't want to buy something that you haven't made yet, that you have to make something first or pay for it yourself first, and then they'll buy it, which I think is one reason why people get stuck trying to get the financing for that first film when they don't have anything to show for themselves that they've done before. I'm just curious about your thoughts on all of that.
Let's start with, remind me of your first point, the first bullet there.
It was the perception that the first few films are the hardest. Yeah.
Okay, so on that one, I can only speak from personal experience, but I would say, yes, it's true, with the caveat that not necessarily from a practicality standpoint, because even if you get more money and more budget, more crew, then your problems scale up as well. So just because you have more money or more experience doesn't always make it easier. Sometimes then you're working on more complex projects and actually can become harder with time. But I think where that statement is accurate is in the sort of just reality check that you get when you make your first couple movies, that gut check. Like, everybody thinks thinks that they're going to make the short film that gets into Sundance and turns into Saw or whatever. And, every filmmaker in high school thinks that that's their path. And the reality is that even if you're a brilliant filmmaker and you make a great film, it's very unlikely that'll happen, not because of your talent, but just because there's so much quantity out there. There's so much politics and how films get programmed and this and that. So I think, when you first make your first couple of films, having to come to that realization that, oh, this is an uphill battle. Like, this isn't as easy as just getting together with friends and making a movie once and setting it to a film festival. This is going to be something that there are no guarantees of. I could spend 50 years doing this and maybe I won't be that much further ahead. But if I'm going to commit to doing it, I'm doing it because I love it. I think that's sort of the thing that happens in your early shorts or features that can be a difficult crossroads for people to hit. And then your second point, which was, again, remind me, because we had a few on that list.
Yeah, it was just this, what was it? I was asking about how you got yours financed. Oh, this idea that it's hard to sell something when you haven't done it before.
Oh, yeah. That's right. So hard to sell something I think that is 100% accurate. I have friends, on all different levels of the industry, some of which have grown up with relatives in show business and have parents who are very wealthy, and other people who are on the exact opposite end, don't know anybody in the industry, don't come from any money. There's really no difference in terms of their ability to actually get something made in the early days, other than, if somebody has access to money, then obviously they can throw that at their own production. But does that mean anybody's actually going to want to see that movie? Will that reach audiences? You can't pay for good reviews. You can't pay an executive of a studio to like your movie and, give you a 3-picture deal. You have to do the work. You have to make a great film. And I personally believe that that's the only path. If there are those random cases that you hear about where some filmmaker, right place at the right time, they pitched an idea in a bar and it turned out the guy was this, Hollywood financier and took a chance on him and they made this $10 million movie. I mean, if lightning strikes, then sure, take advantage of that, but don't bank on winning the lottery, bank on doing the work, because you can get there if you just put one foot in front of the other, do the work and make a movie, and you'll learn along the way. And if you love making movies enough, then you'll just keep doing it. And you'll, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, you'll be content with the process. You'll be happy to be working on those films, even if they don't have a lot of money. And, the way I like to think about it is, everybody wants someone else to back them first. They want the validation of some financier to give them money or whatever it is to make their movie. But if you're not willing to bank on yourself first, if you're not willing to go out on a limb and fund your own movie or make your own thing and step out on a ledge and see what happens, then why should anybody else be willing to do that when there are a million filmmakers ahead of you who have taken that risk and created something? So I mean, that's how I personally look at it. And not that that's, right or wrong, but I do personally think that making your own content is the surest way to just get ahead in this business. And hopefully that kind of answers that question.
Supremely answers it. Yeah, I'm like fist pumping over here. I can't. I think one of the most enjoyable parts about this interview so far has just been how, identifying it has been for me. Oh man, I think that a lot of us are in that place where it's just nice to hear, okay, I'm going to have to this is what I'm going to have to do. And that's okay. It's not so bad to have to make a movie to get to make movies, because that means you're making movies. So, but it's, and by the way, but it's scary.
The amount of people that I've met, especially since doing my podcast, a couple of the guests in particular that I've met who have worked on really high budget projects, really incredible feature films that they've written or directed, things like I'd seen as when I was younger or whatever. And now they all they want to do is make a $20,000 micro budget feature, because that affords them a creative freedom and ability that money could not buy them. And, I think the grass is always greener on the other side. But yeah, I wrote this whole article on my blog recently about this, that, the benefit of making micro budget films is that you could do things that bigger budget productions can't do, because they just have too much money, too many cooks in the kitchen, and producers and lawyers and all these people who are too careful about everything. Like, take advantage of the fact that you're at an early stage in your career and you could take risks and just make content, because that's something that a lot of people who are, technically maybe ahead of you in terms of their career trajectory, like, they don't have that benefit anymore. So if you don't do it now, when's that going to happen?
Right.
Yeah, I think that it's really a mental barrier that a lot of people have, that they have to have this money come in first. And it's really not true. And I love that you're kind of agreeing with that. And we've seen pretty abysmal films made with bigger budgets. And we've seen
really big.
I love this. Someone asked this question. A coach named Brooke Castillo asked this question. She said, would you rather win the lottery, or would you rather earn as much as you could make winning the lottery? And a lot of people would say win the lottery because it's easy. But she says, no, I'd way rather earn it, because if you win it once, then great. But you can't replicate that. You don't actually know how to make that money again. So it's just a one-time thing. But if you actually do the whole process of learning to make it, then that's something you can repeat and continue doing.
And Chris McQuarrie made the same point on his Twitter, where he said, look, we all think that this winning the lottery thing is what gets us into the industry. And so we keep trying to throw our scripts and our ideas and our fates into the hands of the lottery gods, whether they're these festivals or whatever. You mentioned them, you talk about them as gatekeepers, Noam. And he basically said, you might actually win it, but then what? Then you have to go try and win it again. And he said, my career, he said, took a 7-year stall after I got my first big break, quote unquote, because I thought that I was done working. And I just couldn't figure out why nothing was going anywhere after that. And he's like, and I just realized, guess what? Every time I make one of these big movies, I have to go out and I have to work. I have to write. I have to finance. I have to work my butt off and make another movie. And that's the only way you're going to work in this business, is if you're going to work and make movies. And so I appreciate that perspective.
Well, yeah, I think it's so true. I love that quote. I love that sort of analogy to use. And I think, you learn so much more from your failures than your successes. Like I said before, I think when something goes really well and you're making a film, a lot of times it's luck. Like, you do put in the work and you do all the right things, but there is that serendipitous element to it that you can't plan for. And if that happens early on and your first feature just happens to blow up and, everybody loves it and this and that, that's great. That's awesome. And that's going to open a lot of doors for you. But that doesn't guarantee that your next film is going to be good. And, you may now hit challenges on films 2, 3, and 4 that you didn't see before, or that you lucked out on, that you didn't have to deal with those things. And now you don't know how you could replicate that success. And to get really literal with that analogy in terms of winning the lottery, like, look at what happens to people that actually win the lottery.
Right.
The vast majority of them wind up bankrupt or broke because they haven't learned how to manage money. I remember growing up, my neighbors literally won the lottery, and we started saying, oh, they bought a new Jaguar and they bought all these, fancy toys and this and that. And then they had to sell their house not long after because they went through all the money. Whereas somebody who earned that money understands investing, if they understand wealth management, they understand that they can use their money to make more money. They can make investments. Instead of buying a Jaguar, they could put their money into an account that will compound interest for them and pay them dividends every year, so they never have to work again in their life. But they're only going to have that sort of financial IQ if they've actually done the legwork themselves, if they've made the mistakes mistakes on a smaller level and kind of worked their way to the point of making $1 million instead of just being given $1 million. So I think that, the analogy rings true on a very literal level, but certainly, on the filmmaking aspect as well.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm afraid we're probably going to have you on the podcast again.
Well, we are running short on time.
Because we're running a little short on time, so we should. You want to do some of these wrap-up questions?
Yeah, maybe we'll each pick one last question for you. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no rush. Take a couple or however long you need. So.
Okay, so let me think. A good one. Should I go with the purpose of life ones that are like really ethereal?
What do you really want to know
or do I want to get something
Noam?
really practical? Something really practical. So, what are you thinking? Are you going to do one of those big ones?
I'm waiting to hear what you're going to do. So
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll ask a practical one. So I'll let you pick the really cool one. Could you just go into some detail about so far? What has been your approach to financing micro-budget films? And what has been your experience distributing and or selling them?
And can I just add, what would be your advice to someone trying to do the same thing, or to yourself in the past in that regard?
Yep. Great question. To answer sort of the financing part first, because that's sort of the easy answer. Most of what I've done has either been self-financed, or in one case for my last feature, Psychosynthesis, I did a crowdfunding that along with maybe $10,000 in my own money is what funded the feature. So I tend to do that because the movies at this scale and at this stage in my career that I want to make are micro-budget features for all the reasons that we've already outlined. And when you're trying to raise, $20,000, sometimes it's actually easier just to bank that money yourself than to knock on a door, because most investors who are serious, they don't want to invest $20,000. They want to invest, $200,000 or $2 million so they can actually make some real money on it. So yeah, at this stage, I've really been financing my own films. I've been doing that with, money that I make through all sorts of different means through my business, Creative Rebellion, creating commercials for production companies. Also on my online businesses, I have a couple of e-commerce stores that are piggybacked off of my blog, and those have really quickly become a very primary source of income. So I'm thankful that I'm able to finance my own films through these other business endeavors that I have. But I think what you're getting at in terms of the distribution angle as it pertains to monetization is really important to touch on for a second, because most filmmakers, again, they just like how people assume the metric of success when they're making a film is if somebody else is willing to financially back them. They think that how much money their movie makes is a metric of how successful they are as a filmmaker. But I don't think that is the case. And I also don't think that that's a healthy way of looking at things, especially on a micro budget level, where most micro budget films, maybe they make their money back. But if you're making a $20,000 movie and you make your money back, even if you double your money, you make, $40,000, it's not like you're going to retire off of that money. It's not like that's a sustainable business model. So the goal in making a film on this scale is not about return on investment. It's about return on investment only from the perspective of your career as a whole. Is it going to allow you to build your audience, let's say, get into a bigger film festival, get an agent, have a great calling card, develop as an artist? That is the value of the money that you put in. And the distribution of it, you could reach as many people as you want now. Just put your movie on Amazon and you can run ads. You can go on blogs, podcasts like yours and promote your film, and people will find your movie and you'll start to build up a bit of a name for yourself. But as far as just trying to make money from the movie, I think that's the wrong approach. That's trying to do what Hollywood does, but on a micro budget scale, and it doesn't scale down. It just doesn't work that way. You can make money as a result of your filmmaking efforts, but it's usually derivatives. It's usually either derivative products that you create or services. For example, I sell courses on filmmaking, or I sell color correction products on my website, Cinecolor. And the films that I make ultimately are kind of advertisements for all these other products that I have. So, I did a whole breakdown on this recently, how let's say I sell a course for $250. If I were to rent my film on iTunes for $299, and I really get $250, let's say, from that, I have to sell 100 of those to make $250, right? So at the same time, I could just sell one filmmaking course and make the same amount of money. You have to look for ways to monetize your work in different capacities. For some people, that's public speaking or teaching or creating products, services, whatever it is, but it does not have to be inextricably linked. So I know that was a kind of a long answer, but I think that's the best I could probably share on that topic.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I'm really glad you went into that much detail. I just want to encourage our listeners to just familiarize yourself with everything Noam's doing, just so you can get an idea of his model, and you can purchase the educational material, which will go into even more depth on how he set this all up. And then I would also recommend subscribe to his free email list, because there's great education there. We love it. And stay up to date with what he's doing. Noam, I have utter confidence that your career is going to be one worth watching, and we're going to enjoy watching your films as you continue to make them. So, yeah.
I agree with that, and we'll definitely give you a minute right at the end to tell people where they can connect with you and learn more. I am kind of lumping 3 questions into one on this last one.
I kind of cheated and did 2 in one.
No worries. And I've got a text that I've got a few more minutes, 10 more minutes than I thought. So if we run on, it's totally fine. But
awesome.
Yeah, feel free to fire away when you're ready.
I guess what I'm thinking about is I'm curious about why you decided to become a filmmaker, and just in general, I feel like we talked about how making a film is a miracle whenever you can, and it is a gift, and it's something that people want so badly that many people think that they need to sacrifice everything to be able to make a film. And as we've also talked about, that's not really necessary. But I do think it's something people are very passionate about, and I'm sure you're also very passionate about. I want to ask you, why do you think that is? What is the power that films have? I'll just leave it at that. I won't try to.
Well, no, it's a great question. I think that for me, it's something that, again, this is such a cliche. Every filmmaker has probably said this, but it kind of feels like it chose you. Like most of the time, actually making films, as much as I talk about wanting to enjoy the process, like most of it's not actually enjoyable. Like, trying to raise funds like we talked about, or taking jobs that I don't necessarily love to put that money away to go and make a film, or solving problems on set, getting into the edit room and seeing all the ideas that you had that didn't quite land exactly how you wanted them to. That stuff is very difficult, and it's not really for the faint of heart. And I think that you don't do it necessarily because it's this easy thing, or this thing that's always just fun, even though it kind of looks like that before you get started. I think you just do it because you have to. I think it's a creative outlet. It's a release. It's almost, some sort of form of therapy or something, but it's just a meditative experience. If I pick up my guitar and I play music for an hour, I feel so much better, after that hour than I did before. It just clears my mind. It's some sort of self-expression. Same thing if I write a few good pages on a script and have a really good writing day and I'm not blocked. That feeling of taking something that's in your mind and sharing it, hopefully in a way that's going to resonate with other people and be meaningful somehow, and, connect your mind and your thoughts to other people and teach them something or express something to them that's helpful. I think that's where it all stems from. And if it was just about trying to get notoriety with your films or make money with your films, none of us would be doing this, because there are no guarantees of that. It really has to come from that kind of burning desire to just, self-express.
Interesting. Yeah. So on that note, what has been maybe the best or the most beautiful filmmaking experience that you've ever had?
That's a tough one. It's always easier to answer what's the worst film.
You can answer that one too if you want.
But probably the best. Honestly, I think it's funny to say this, but I think some of the best filmmaking experiences were like the very earliest ones. The first short films that I ever made that now, if I look at them, 15 years later, I'll just cringe. They're awful and shot on little mini DV tapes and look stupid, and the writing is horrible. Like everything is garbage.
You wrote them?
Yeah.
I didn't write any of mine. We just
Yeah, sure. But it's just, there's something when you first do it and you see everything come to life, and it's just like, as stressful as it can be, even in those early days, there's that moment where I remember just sitting down. My friends had composed some music for this little short film I made, and watching it back with them and just feeling it come to life. Those memories of just seeing everyone's hard work and like the idea that I had somehow get manifested, that's the reward. It's not been, like I've never played at Sundance or anything like that, but I've played at some great film festivals, and I've had cool in-person screenings and all sorts of stuff that have been sort of highlights from an external validation perspective. But those aren't the things I ever think of as, the pivotal moments. It's always just sitting with a friend, coming up with a great idea, or looking back at something and saying, oh, wow, it looked so ugly in that location, but somehow it looks beautiful on the image we captured. That is kind of what I'm always chasing and hoping to sort of get that feeling on everything that I do.
Yeah, that's
kind of sounds like either the dating or honeymoon phase of falling in love with film, and then
you're trying to capture that again. Yeah,
exactly.
That's a good analogy.
It's easier to get early on because you're so naive that everything you do, even if it's terrible, you kind of like it. And you're like, oh, well, even though this is maybe garbage, it's like, I know that I made it not knowing anything and just with friends in this crappy little camera. So like, you still know that it has some sort of intrinsic value to it. But yeah, I think now, with each subsequent film, that's something that, going back to that other question, that does get harder to like find that joy in the film that you're working on, because everything you work on, okay, well, eventually a critic is going to see this, or someone's going to criticize how we tackled this part of the subject matter. You have so many things, you're not as naive, so it doesn't allow you to have as many of those sort of moments of just pure, enjoyment of the process. But if you get there, I think it's just so rewarding.
Well, and it's also sort of the first time that you're harnessing this godlike power of being able to create something that didn't exist before, and have something that was just an idea in your head be this real thing you can share with other people that now exists. And it's almost like that idea that there's no ugly babies. Like there's no such thing as a baby you don't love. You're just like, oh my gosh, you're perfect,
Yeah, but we all know we fail on the first baby. It's just a wreck.
And it makes you appreciate other movies, I think, that much more, because everyone, like, I'm sure as filmmakers, we all have had the experience of having other people who are not filmmakers, who are friends or family members or whatever, kind of diminish what we do, or not even personally, or not that they're meaning to, but just not getting how hard it is to write a script. Like how many times have we had a friend say, oh, I could have written that movie better, or pick apart your movie or whatever it is, but you just don't know until you've done it, how difficult it actually can be, and it's impossible to sort of appreciate it. But yeah, I would be curious to at some point have you guys on my podcast too, because now this is opening up a whole other set of questions that I want to ask you. But we'll have to do a crossover.
I know it's been really enjoyable, and I'm sure it will be for our listeners as well. So thank you so much for your time. How can people connect with you or learn more about your work?
Sure. Well, the best way is to sign up for my newsletter. So if you go to noamkroll.com, it's spelled NOAMKROLL.com/newsletter. I have an archive of almost 150 newsletter articles that I've written all about filmmaking and really like the philosophy behind filmmaking and just being a creative person, a creative entrepreneur, etc. So that is where I always direct people. If they're just going to do one thing, I say sign up for that. And then through my same website, noamkroll.com, you can find all my social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. You can also find my regular blog, which is hosted there with camera tips and reviews and stuff like that. And then my podcast, Show Don't Tell, which is 120 something episodes in right now and a lot of fun. So lots of great content on there. So I'm sort of a lot of places right now, but yeah, the hub is that main website, noamkroll.com. So hopefully I'll see some of you guys over there.
Yeah, we'll link to it in our show notes and definitely recommend that you guys check that out.
Absolutely. The movie you're working on now, I know you said you're working on a somewhat larger feature film right now. You're developing it. Is there any information out on your website or anywhere where we could learn about that as well?
Not yet. I'm thinking about sort of going a little more public just to give myself incentive to hold myself accountable. That's one of the things I love about putting out content. If you say you're going to do something, then you kind of have to follow through with it. So no, I haven't written about it yet. I'm actually developing 2 projects. One is a larger project that I plan to raise some money for because like I said on this newsletter, we're in quarantine or maybe not quarantine, but we're sort of like in this weird state right now, whatever you want to call it. And why not, spend some time knocking on doors and trying to get some money and writing something more ambitious. But I'm also writing a very small contained micro budget film that I maybe want to try to shoot in the next few months even. So, hopefully there will be some more details about both of those films.
I apologize for laughing. It's like I'm talking to myself.
Described our situation
you
too.
just described exactly.
So
we have 2 pitch decks. One is a micro budget and one is $750,000.
We really have been nodding our heads the whole time with exactly everything you've been saying. So this is really fun.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway.
It makes sense. And that's like for another podcast or something, but it's a great topic is having multiple projects on the go. It's one of the best ways to stay creative and not get too bogged down in one project. And, especially when they're on different budget levels. So yeah, we're definitely on the same wavelength. And like I said, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys having me on, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Noam. You have a great night.
Thank you for joining us today. If you like what you're learning on the podcast, the best compliment you can give us, as you know, is always a referral or a 5-star review. And when you're ready and you want to take these tools deeper to the next level, we encourage you to check out the Film and Family Program, where you will start out by getting private coaching on your specific goals with a guarantee that you'll be able to get one of the results that you want by the end of that coaching, and ongoing support for life within the group with group coaching as well as courses as we develop them. And you'll be able to participate in all of that for a very good price, which you can check out on our website. It's invisiblemansion.com. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.